So this is the JBL Partybox Ultimate. It is an insanely large Bluetooth speaker that gets very loud, it has very violent bass, and it has an incredible looking light feature. However, it is big and it is pricey. But today we're going to compare the Partybox Ultimate to two smaller and more affordable options. Now, this isn't an apples to apples comparison, but let's see how the JBL Partybox Ultimate compares to both the Soundboks 4 and the Sony XV900. Regarding pricing, this alone can be a deciding factor. The JBL Partybox Ultimate has a retail price of $1,600. That's way up there. Whereas the Soundboks 4 has a retail price of $1,000. Still up there, but not as painful. And finally, there's the Sony XB900, which has a retail price of $900, but it does like to go on sale for $800. Overall, all of these speakers are great, but depending on your needs, one is going to be better over the other. Nonetheless, if you want to pick any of these speakers up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, pick up a Big Head approved hat, link down below. We've got trucker hats and snapbacks. By buying a hat, you help the unbiased and unsponsored videos coming, and it also helps us cover more products and produce more versus videos. Thank you to everyone who's already bought a hat, and look out for more designs coming soon. And also, please remember to hit that like button and let's get subscribed. Now first, let's talk about the design of these speakers. The JBL Partybox Ultimate just dwarfs these other two speakers. It has a height of 41 inches, a base of 17 by 17 inches, and it weighs in at 87 pounds. Whereas the XV900 has a height of 35 inches and a base of 16 by 19 inches, and it weighs in at 59 pounds. Overall, moving these speakers is a two-person job, especially if you plan on carrying them upstairs. But more so the Partybox Ultimate. But thankfully, both of these speakers have built-in wheels, so transporting these speakers is a little easier. But the thing is, the wheels on the Ultimate are chunky, so they're very usable, whereas the wheels on the XV900 are small, so they're not as helpful, especially when outdoors. But then there's the Soundboks 4. Now, one of the main selling points about the Soundboks 4 is its relatively small size and durability. First off, this speaker is much smaller and much lighter, weighing in at 35 pounds. So moving the speaker around is much easier and it's a one-person job. But also, the Soundboks 4 is a lot more durable than these other two speakers thanks to its popular cabinet, aluminum frame, silicone balls, and a rugged steel grille on the front. Whereas these other two speakers, their plastic bodies are a lot more fragile. So if you're looking for a large speaker to take on the go with you, then the Soundboks 4 is the way to go thanks to its smaller size and added durability. Whereas these other two speakers are better suited for your man cave or around the house. But something the Soundboks 4 doesn't have is a light feature, which you could miss if you're looking for something for your man cave. Now, both the Sony and JBL have built-in light features. Both of these light features have floor lights, which I just love, and you can customize these light features as well. But clearly, you can see that the light feature on the JBL Partybox Ultimate is a lot more impressive and a lot more dynamic than the light feature found on the Sony XV900. But here, this is one of the biggest differences between the Partybox Ultimate and these other two speakers, and that's the Partybox Ultimate does not have a built-in battery. You can only use the Ultimate while it's plugged in. So if you're looking for something that's portable, then the Ultimate might not be for you. Whereas the Sony XV900 does have a built-in battery. But if you use the light feature on the Sony XV900, that is going to take an additional toll on the battery life. Now, the Sony XB900 has an advertised battery life of 25 hours, but this advertised battery life of 25 hours is with this speaker playing at 30% volume and with the mega bass feature turned on, which is good, but that's with the light feature turned off. If you were to use the speaker with the light feature turned on, then your battery life is going to go down to 12 hours. But if you were to use the speaker at max volume and with the light feature turned on and with the mega bass feature turned on, then it's going to be good for around 4 hours of playback time. So whether you have the light feature or the mega bass feature turned on this speaker, and also depending on the volume that you're using it at, that is going to affect your overall battery life. But then there's the Soundboks 4. First off, if you were to use the speaker at 50% volume and while it's in its stock EQ, then it's going to be good for around 40 hours of playback time, which is very impressive. However, if you were to use the speaker at max volume and while it's in its stage EQ, and this is the EQ setting that you want to use if you want to get the most out of this speaker, because you're going to have more bass and it's going to get louder, then it's going to be good for up to 6 hours of playback time, which is longer than the Sony XB900, and max volume on the Soundboks 4 is significantly louder than max volume on the Sony XB900. But the really cool thing about the Soundboks is that you can easily swap out the batteries in it. So if you have multiple batteries, then you can just swap them out and keep the party going with the Soundboks. And this is something that you just can't do with these other two speakers. Now, regarding connectivity, with both the Sony and JBL, both of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJing, whereas with the Soundboks, it can only be connected to one device at a time. But what is unique to the Partybox Ultimate here is that it has Wi-Fi support. So if you're connected to the same Wi-Fi network as the Partybox Ultimate, then you'll be able to stream music to it either through AirPlay 2 or Chromecast. So whether you're an iPhone user or an Android user, you'll be fine. But with all of these speakers, they all have a 3.5mm audio jack, so you can always just use them with a wired connection. But with both the JBL and the Soundboks, both of these speakers have an audio out jack, so you can always daisy chain either of these two speakers to any other speaker, regardless of brand or size, and you'll be able to get them to play in sync. Whereas with the XB900, it doesn't have an audio out jack, but it does have an optical port. So if you want, you can always connect it to your TV and use it as a soundbar. And finally, both the Sony and the JBL have a USB-A port so that you can plug in a USB stick and play music off of it, whereas the Soundboks doesn't. And you can always use these USB-A ports to charge your own devices, but like I've mentioned multiple times already, I feel that speakers should start come included with a USB-C port so that you can charge your own devices and so that you can also use it as a wired connection, because most phones these days now just come included with a USB-C to USB-C charging cable. And finally, with all of these speakers, you can plug in two microphones for karaoke, or you can plug in a guitar. But with the Soundboks, it is using dual XLR combo jacks. So if you want, you can also plug it into a mixer, which makes it a lot more versatile. And if you're someone that likes to moonlight as a DJ, then you might want to go with the Soundboks. Now, personally, I am indifferent about the Sony XB900 not having any XLR inputs, but I really do feel that the Partybox Ultimate should have an XLR input or two, because this speaker is just too big and too expensive to not have any. And I also feel that the Partybox Ultimate should have more than just two inputs for microphones, because again, it's just too big and too expensive to only have 2 1/4-inch inputs. So right now, I just kind of feel that the Partybox Ultimate is an over-glorified karaoke machine, whereas with the Soundboks 4, it's a lot more portable and it's a lot more versatile. But with all of that out of the way, let's talk about sound. Regarding speaker setups, these speakers are fairly different from one another. With the Soundboks, we have dual front firing woofers with exhaust ports that shoot out the sides, and we have a single tweeter horn. With the Sony XB900, we have a front firing woofer with an exhaust port that shoots out the front, dual front firing middle-range drivers, and we have a total of 6 tweeters, 2 on the front, 1 on each side, and 2 that shoot out the rear and upwards. And finally, there's the Partybox Ultimate. Now, it's the largest speaker here, and it has dual front firing woofers with an exhaust port that shoots out the back, dual front firing middle-range drivers, and dual front firing tweeters. But now, we're going to jump into the sound test. Now, all of these speakers are playing at 75% volume, but so that the XB900 can keep up, it's playing while it's plugged in, because when you use it while it's plugged in, you're going to get a performance boost out of it. Whereas with the Soundboks, you don't get a performance boost. Now, the Ultimate is playing with its stock EQ and with its bass boost set to deep. The Soundboks is playing with its stage EQ, and this is the EQ setting that you want to use to get the most out of the speaker. And the XB900 is playing with its mega bass feature turned on.
Feel you carry own method, looking for the one who's trying to be perfect, yeah. You'll try to match it, don't be sad if you don't make it, You hope for wonders, living life means making blunders. It can make you shatter, you will try to fight the thunder. Trust me no matter what happens, because I will stay by your side in your heart. Whatever happens, remember that you can do anything you want. You can do anything you want. Follow the light if you're not sure, listen to your gut. The right path will come when the time is right. Take your own method, looking for the one who's trying to be perfect, yeah. You'll try to match it, don't be sad if you don't make it, You hope for wonders, living life means making blunders. It can make you shatter, you will try to fight the thunder. Trust me no matter what happens, because I will stay by your side in your heart. Whatever happens, remember that you can do anything you want. You can do anything you want.
So first, we're going to have to adjust max volume performance on these speakers. Now, just as you'd expect, since the Partybox Ultimate is the largest speaker here, it's going to get the loudest, and it also has the most physicality in its bass. And since it has a rear-firing exhaust port, you can always amplify its bass by simply placing it up against the wall. But then there's the Soundboks 4. Now, the Soundboks 4 also gets super loud, and its sheer loudness is very impressive relative to its size and when compared to the Partybox Ultimate. Now, the Soundboks 4 also has a lot of physicality in its bass. It has more bass than its predecessor, but the physicality is nowhere near as much as the Partybox Ultimate. And since its exhaust ports shoot out the sides, if you want to amplify its bass, you're going to have to place it in a corner. But in general, the bass on the Soundboks leans more towards the audible side than onto the physical side, like with the Partybox. And then there's the Sony XB900. Now, again, this speaker gets very loud, but it just doesn't get as loud as these other two speakers. And if you were to use the Sony XB900 while it's unplugged, then its performance is going to reduce a little bit. It just won't get as loud and it won't have as much bass. Now, don't get me wrong, this speaker still gets more than loud enough. It just doesn't get as loud as these other two speakers. And then there's its bass. The bass on the XB900 is much more to the audible side than with these other two speakers. And when it comes to the overall sound quality of these speakers, the Sony XB900 has a neutral sound signature to it. Both the vocals and the bass have equal footing here. Now, the vocals on the Soundboks 4 are also very well pronounced, but the bass comes in much stronger than on the XB900. But the crucial thing here is the vocals on the Soundboks 4 aren't overemphasized and they aren't overly bright. But finally, there's the JBL Partybox Ultimate, which always manages to keep its mids and vocals front and center, but the bass is still always present and it comes in very violently when it has to. So with the JBL Partybox Ultimate, it's always aiming to have the best clarity, even if that means pumping up the mids to keep them front and center. Now personally, I also really like how the Soundboks 4 sounds, and finally there's the Sony XV900. I also like how their speaker sounds, but it just doesn't have as much bass or get as loud as these other two options. But most importantly, with all of of these speakers, they all have an adjustable EQ, so you can always make them sound however you want. If you want more bass, you can do that, or if you want a brighter EQ for outdoor use, you can also do that. But finally, let's talk about pairing these speakers up to other speakers, and plainly said, the JBL Partybox Ultimate is the worst option here if you plan on getting multiple speakers. Now, first off, for right now, you can only pair your JBL Partybox Ultimate to another Ultimate, and your two speakers are going to play in left to right stereo mode, and your light features are going to play in sync. The problem is you need a Wi-Fi connection to do this. So if you plan on using your two Ultimates in an area where you don't have any Wi-Fi, then you're gonna have to physically daisy chain your two speakers together, so your two speakers are only going to play in sync, and your light features aren't going to be in sync. But more importantly, you cannot pair your Ultimate to any of JBL's other party boxes, like a 710, 310, 110, or to an Encore. And also, you cannot connect your Ultimate to any of JBL's smaller party boost speakers, like a JBL Boombox 3, a Boombox 2, an Extreme 3, a Charge 5, a Pulse 5, a Pulse 4, a Flip 5, or a Flip 6, unless you have the Wi-Fi version of the Boombox 3 or the Charge 5. The only silver lining here is, since the Ultimate is a Wi-Fi speaker, you can always pair it up to any of your other Wi-Fi enabled speakers. Now, there have been talks that JBL is going to fix this issue on the Ultimates, but until they do, this over-reliance on Wi-Fi is ridiculous. But then there's the Soundboks 4. Now, with the Soundboks 4, you can wirelessly connect it to another Soundboks 4, a Soundboks 3, or to a Soundboks Go. You can have up to 5 soundboxes wirelessly connected to one another. You can use any two soundboxes to get left and right stereo sound going, but most importantly, you don't need Wi-Fi. So you can wirelessly pair your speakers together anywhere and be a nuisance, especially with soundboxes. And finally, there's the Sony XV900. Now with the Sony XV900, you can pair it up to another Sony XB900 and get left and right stereo sound going, or you can connect it to any of Sony's other box speakers, like an XV800, XP700, or to an XP500, and you can get them to play in sync. And you can pair up to 100 speakers together. But also, with the Sony XV900, you can also pair it up to any of Sony's smaller speakers, like an XG500, XG300, XE300, XB43, XB33, or XB23. And most importantly, you don't need Wi-Fi. Overall, I really like the versatility in Sony speaker pairing protocol here. However, sometimes it can be a bit of a hassle to use. But if you do plan on buying a box speaker, and if you do plan on growing your collection of speakers in the future, then right now in this lineup, the Sony XV900 is your best option. But, like I mentioned earlier, both the Partybox and Soundboks have those audio out jacks, so you can always daisy chain them up to any other speaker out there, regardless of size or brand, and you can get them to play in sync, which is a very useful feature that's missing on the Sony XV900. But with all that being said, all of these speakers are great, but they're very different from one another. The JBL Partybox Ultimate is a monster. Its light feature looks amazing, and it gets extremely loud, and it has very violent bass. One is more than enough for any sane person. However, I don't like its over-reliance on Wi-Fi, and this isn't the most portable thing out there. But then there's the Soundboks 4. This speaker also sounds great and gets very loud, but most importantly, it's super durable and portable, and the swappable battery makes it a great option for outdoor use. Plus, you can use it with a mixer if you'd like. But finally, there's the Sony XV900. This speaker is a decent middle ground between the Partybox and Soundboks. It has a built-in battery and it has a built-in light feature. It just doesn't get as loud as these other two speakers, but you can pair it up to your smaller Sony speakers. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something if I'm really proud of it.